The morning sun cast long shadows across the expansive veranda of Thornfield Ranch as Catherine Gardner stood at the carved oak railing, her gloved hands gripping the smooth wood with barely concealed tension. Below in the courtyard, dust clouds announced the arrival of yet another suitor, the third this month dispatched by her father's careful correspondence with families across 3 territories. At 23, she had become what society deemed perilously close to a spinster, a fact her father reminded her of with increasing frequency and decreasing patience. "Catherine, do come away from that window," commanded Eleanor Gardner from the drawing-room doorway, her voice carrying the crisp authority that had managed one of Colorado's most successful cattle empires alongside her husband for the past 25 years. "Mr. Hadley will think you eager, which is most unseemly for a lady of your station." Catherine turned reluctantly from her observation post, smoothing the emerald silk of her morning dress with practiced grace. Her mother's expectations weighed as heavily as the elaborate bustle fashion demanded, though Catherine suspected the latter was far more comfortable to bear. "I was merely ensuring our guest would not encounter any difficulties finding the main entrance, Mother. Surely hospitality cannot be deemed improper." Eleanor's sharp gray eyes missed nothing, including the subtle defiance threading through her daughter's dutiful words. "Your concern for Mr. Hadley's navigation skills is noted, though I believe a gentleman capable of managing a railroad consortium can surely locate our front door without feminine assistance." She moved into the room with the measured steps of someone accustomed to having her presence acknowledged immediately. "Your father has invested considerable effort in arranging this introduction. The Hadley family controls significant shipping interests throughout the Western Territories, and their eldest son represents an alliance that would benefit both our families substantially." Catherine seated herself in the blue velvet chair positioned to receive callers, arranging her skirts with the mechanical precision of years of training. "I understand the strategic advantages, Mother. You and Father have explained them quite thoroughly on multiple occasions." She paused, then added with careful neutrality, "Though I confess I find myself curious about Mr. Hadley's personal qualities beyond his business acumen." "Personal qualities," Eleanor repeated, the phrase carrying the faint disdain reserved for impractical considerations. "A woman of sense evaluates a suitor's character through his accomplishments and prospects, Catherine. Romantic notions are luxury items poorly suited to the realities of maintaining a family legacy." She moved to adjust a crystal vase on the mantelpiece, though it required no adjustment. "Your father built this ranch from nothing through practical decisions and strategic partnerships. Marriage represents the most important partnership you will ever form. I trust you will approach it with appropriate seriousness." The sound of horses and carriages growing closer forestalled Catherine's response, though she found herself grateful for the interruption. Her mother's pragmatic view of marriage had produced a successful union by all external measures, yet Catherine could not recall ever witnessing a moment of spontaneous affection between her parents. They functioned as efficient business partners managing a shared enterprise, their personal interactions governed by courtesy and mutual respect rather than warmer emotions. "Mr. Charles Hadley," announced Morrison, the family's longtime butler, appearing in the doorway with formal precision. "And his traveling companion, Mr. Simon Carmichael." Catherine rose as the gentleman entered, taking swift inventory of her prospective suitor. Charles Hadley possessed the confident bearing of inherited wealth, his dark suit impeccably tailored and his manner suggesting comfortable familiarity with formal social situations. He was handsome in a conventional sense, with regular features and carefully maintained side whiskers that proclaimed attention to current fashion. His bow demonstrated proper breeding, though Catherine detected a mechanical quality to his courtesy that suggested frequent practice with similar introductions. "Mrs. Gardner, Miss Gardner," Mr. Hadley said, his voice carrying the cultured accents of Eastern education. "I am honored by your gracious invitation to visit Thornfield Ranch. The reputation of your hospitality precedes you throughout the territory." Eleanor smiled with genuine warmth, clearly pleased by his polished address. "Mr. Hadley, we are delighted to welcome you to our home. I trust your journey from Denver proceeded without difficulty." The railroad portion proved entirely comfortable, though the final leg by carriage offered rather more adventure than anticipated, Hadley replied with practiced humor. Fortunately, my companion Mr. Carmichael possesses considerable expertise with horses and mechanical difficulties, which proved invaluable when we encountered a broken axle some miles back. Catherine's attention shifted to the second gentleman, who had remained quietly observant during the formal exchanges. Simon Carmichael presented a marked contrast to his traveling companion, his clothes practical rather than fashionable, his manner suggesting comfort with physical work rather than drawing-room conversation. His dark hair showed traces of recent grooming, though rebellious waves resisted complete order, and his hands bore the subtle calluses that marked a man accustomed to useful labor. "Mr. Carmichael," Catherine said, extending her hand in polite acknowledgement. "We are pleased to make your acquaintance as well." He accepted her hand with careful formality, though Catherine noticed his grip possessed a warmth and strength that spoke of genuine work rather than social exercise. "Miss Gardner, the pleasure is entirely mine. Your family's ranch represents everything admirable about Western enterprise and vision." His voice carried an intriguing combination of education and practical experience, lacking the polished artifice of practiced social conversation yet demonstrating genuine respect and intelligence. Catherine found herself curious about his background and relationship to Mr. Hadley, though proper etiquette prevented direct inquiry. "Mr. Carmichael serves as my business manager and has proven invaluable in evaluating potential investments and partnerships," Hadley explained, settling into the offered chair with easy confidence. "His expertise with railroad construction and cattle operations makes him an ideal advisor for ventures in developing territories." Eleanor nodded approvingly. "How practical! The complexity of modern business requires such specialized knowledge." She gestured toward the silver tea service Morrison had silently arranged. "Perhaps you would care for refreshment after your journey? Catherine, would you be so kind as to serve our guests?" Catherine moved to the tea service with practiced grace, grateful for the familiar ritual that provided structure to an otherwise uncertain social situation. As she prepared cups according to each gentleman's preferences, she became aware of Mr. Carmichael's quiet observation of the room's appointments, his gaze taking inventory with the methodical attention of someone accustomed to evaluating assets and potential. "Your ranch operations must require considerable coordination," Carmichael observed, accepting his cup with a nod of thanks. "The integration of cattle raising, agricultural production, and the supporting infrastructure represents significant logistical complexity." Catherine found herself responding before considering the appropriateness of engaging in business discussion. "Father has developed remarkably efficient systems over the years. The seasonal rotation of grazing areas, coordination with railroad shipping schedules, and management of water rights across our holdings requires constant attention to detail." She paused, suddenly conscious of her mother's sharp attention. "Though naturally, I observe these operations only peripherally." "Catherine has always shown interest in the practical aspects of ranch management," Eleanor said smoothly, though her tone suggested mild disapproval. "Though such concerns typically fall outside a lady's proper sphere of influence." Hadley smiled with indulgent amusement. "A certain familiarity with one's family business demonstrates admirable loyalty, though naturally such matters would be managed by appropriate masculine oversight in marriage." He regarded Catherine with the satisfaction of someone examining a particularly well-trained horse. "I confess myself impressed by the scope of Thornfield's operations. The potential for expansion through strategic alliance with railroad interests presents fascinating possibilities." Catherine felt an unexpected flash of irritation at his casual assumption of future authority over her family's enterprise, though she maintained her composed expression. "Expansion certainly offers opportunities, though one must balance growth against maintaining the quality standards that have established our reputation." "Quite sensible," Carmichael said quietly, his tone suggesting genuine consideration rather than polite agreement. "Rapid expansion without adequate infrastructure development can compromise the very assets that make growth desirable in the first place." Their eyes met briefly, and Catherine detected a spark of shared understanding that surprised her with its intensity. Here was someone who comprehended the delicate balance between ambition and sustainability that her father had taught her to value, though such lessons were supposedly wasted on feminine understanding. Mr. Carmichael raises valid concerns, Hadley agreed, though his tone suggested mild impatience with detailed consideration. Though naturally, modern efficiency methods can address such challenges adequately. He turned his attention fully to Catherine. Miss Gardner, perhaps you might show me your gardens? I understand they represent a particular achievement of feminine cultivation. Catherine recognized the dismissal of business discussion in favor of supposedly appropriate feminine interests, though she complied with gracious acceptance. I would be delighted, Mr. Hadley. Mother has created quite remarkable displays that showcase both native and cultivated varieties. As they rose to venture outside, Eleanor addressed Carmichael with practiced hostess courtesy. Mr. Carmichael, perhaps you would care to inspect our stables while Mr. Hadley enjoys the gardens? I believe you would find our breeding program of professional interest. Catherine caught the subtle maneuvering that would separate the men, allowing her mother to evaluate Hadley's character through private conversation while providing appropriate supervision for Catherine's time with her suitor. The arrangement demonstrated Eleanor's sophisticated understanding of social strategy, though Catherine felt a surprising reluctance to leave Carmichael's thoughtful presence. The gardens stretched across several terraced acres behind the main house, incorporating both practical kitchen plots and ornamental displays designed to showcase the family's prosperity and refined taste. Catherine guided Hadley along graveled paths bordered by carefully maintained flower beds, pointing out various specimens while maintaining the appropriate conversation expected of such tours. Your mother's horticultural achievements reflect admirable dedication, Hadley observed, pausing beside a display of roses imported from Eastern nurseries. The creation of beauty requires considerable investment and ongoing attention. Mother believes that cultivating beauty represents a woman's contribution to civilizing influence, Catherine replied, though something in his phrasing struck her as oddly calculating. Though she has also developed quite practical herb gardens that serve both culinary and medicinal purposes for the ranch community. Hadley nodded with polite interest, though Catherine sensed his attention focused more on her person than her words. His gaze held an assessing quality that made her self-conscious, as though he were evaluating her appearance and manner according to some internal standard of acceptable feminine qualities. Miss Gardner, I hope you will permit me to speak with unusual directness, he said, pausing beside a secluded bench positioned to offer privacy from the house windows. Your father and mine have discussed the potential advantages of uniting our families through marriage. I find myself quite favorably impressed by your accomplishments and deportment. Catherine felt her heart skip with surprise at his immediate approach to the subject both families had carefully avoided naming directly. Mr. Hadley, such frankness is rather unexpected after so brief an acquaintance. Indeed, though I believe in addressing practical matters efficiently rather than prolonging uncertainty through extended courtship rituals, he replied, his tone suggesting this represented superior modern thinking. Your family's ranch operations would integrate advantageously with my transportation interests, creating opportunities for mutual prosperity. You yourself possess the education and breeding appropriate for representing our combined enterprises in social and business contexts. Catherine stared at him, struggling to process the cold calculation underlying his proposal. You speak of marriage as though arranging a business merger, Mr. Hadley. He smiled with the confidence of someone accustomed to having his practical wisdom appreciated. Marriage among families of our standing necessarily involves business considerations, Miss Gardner. Romantic sentiment, while pleasant, represents a luxury that responsible adults balance against practical necessities. He moved closer, his voice taking on a more intimate tone. Though naturally, I anticipate that mutual respect and affection will develop through shared interests and compatible temperaments. Catherine found herself backing away instinctively, troubled by his assumption that her agreement could be taken for granted. Mr. Hadley, while I appreciate your directness, such momentous decisions require careful consideration rather than immediate resolution. His expression showed mild irritation at her failure to demonstrate appropriate gratitude for his offer. Naturally, though I trust you understand that opportunities of this caliber demand timely response. My business commitments will require my departure tomorrow afternoon, and I would prefer to conclude arrangements before returning to Denver. The casual pressure underlying his words sparked Catherine's temper, though she struggled to maintain polite composure. "I see. And if I require more time for consideration than your schedule permits?" "Miss Gardner, surely your parents have prepared you adequately for this decision," he replied with the patronizing patience reserved for feminine unreasonableness. "Your father has already indicated his approval of the alliance. Your role involves providing gracious acceptance and preparing for the transition to your new responsibilities." Catherine felt a surge of rebellious anger at his casual dismissal of her autonomy, though years of training in proper behavior prevented immediate expression of her feelings. "My father values my happiness as well as practical considerations, Mr. Hadley. He would not pressure me toward a decision that conflicts with my personal inclinations." Hadley's smile tightened slightly, suggesting less patience for resistance than his words indicated. "Personal inclinations represent luxuries better afforded after securing one's future through practical alliances, Miss Gardner. I trust that reflection will demonstrate the wisdom of accepting advantages that may not present themselves again." Before Catherine could respond to what sounded remarkably like a threat, the sound of approaching footsteps announced the return of her mother and Mr. Carmichael from their tour of the stables. Catherine felt profound relief at the interruption, though she noticed Carmichael's sharp attention to her obvious discomfort and Hadley's barely concealed irritation. "I trust you have enjoyed inspecting our garden achievements," Eleanor said with bright social enthusiasm. Though her experienced eye quickly assessed the tension between her daughter and the prospective suitor. "Indeed, Mrs. Gardner. Miss Gardner has proven a most knowledgeable guide," Hadley replied, recovering his polished manner with practiced ease. "Her familiarity with both ornamental and practical cultivation demonstrates admirable feminine accomplishment." Catherine caught the subtle emphasis that reduced her extensive knowledge to appropriate decorative feminine interest, though she maintained her composed expression despite growing irritation. Her gaze met Carmichael's briefly, and she detected sympathetic understanding in his dark eyes that suggested he had perceived Hadley's condescending dismissal of her intelligence. "Mr. Carmichael has been examining our breeding program with considerable expertise," Eleanor continued, clearly pleased by his serious attention to their family's achievements. "His knowledge of bloodline development and training methods reflects impressive practical experience. The quality of your stock represents years of careful selection and investment," Carmichael said, his tone carrying genuine respect rather than polite compliment. "The integration of working capability with stamina and intelligence demonstrates sophisticated understanding of breeding principles." Catherine found herself drawn into the conversation despite the awkwardness of the social situation. "Father believes that short-term profits from inferior animals ultimately damage long-term reputation and operational efficiency. Quality requires patience and ongoing investment." "Precisely," Carmichael agreed, his attention focused entirely on her words rather than her appearance. "The temptation to maximize immediate returns often conflicts with building sustainable excellence, though the latter approach ultimately proves more profitable." Hadley cleared his throat with obvious impatience. While such attention to detail demonstrates admirable conscientiousness, modern efficiency methods can achieve similar results through more systematic approaches. He turned to Eleanor with practiced charm. "Mrs. Gardner, perhaps we might return to the house? I have certain matters I would like to discuss with Mr. Gardner regarding our family's potential alliance." Eleanor's expression brightened with satisfaction, clearly interpreting his request as confirmation that the courtship had proceeded satisfactorily. "Certainly, Mr. Hadley. I believe you will find my husband quite receptive to productive discussions." As they walked back toward the house, Catherine found herself walking beside Carmichael while Hadley engaged her mother in animated conversation about railroad development prospects. The proximity allowed quiet exchange away from official scrutiny, though Catherine remained conscious of the impropriety of private conversation with a gentleman she had only just met. "Miss Gardner, I hope you will forgive my presumption, but you seem somewhat distressed," Carmichael said softly, his tone carrying genuine concern rather than idle curiosity. Catherine glanced ahead to ensure they remained out of hearing range before responding. "Mr. Hadley possesses rather definite opinions about the pace at which important decisions should be made." "Ah," Carmichael said with understanding. The pressure of business schedules unfortunately does not always accommodate the deliberation that personal matters deserve. His diplomatic phrasing allowed Catherine to confirm her discomfort without criticizing her suitor directly, demonstrating both social awareness and sensitivity to her difficult position. Indeed. Though I suppose one must balance personal preferences against practical necessities. Perhaps, Carmichael replied carefully, though the most practical choice may not always be the one that appears most immediately advantageous. He paused, then added with quiet conviction, true partnership requires mutual respect and understanding rather than mere complementary assets. Catherine felt a warm rush of gratitude for his validation of her instinctive resistance to Hadley's calculating approach. Mr. Carmichael, may I ask how you came to be associated with Mr. Hadley? Your perspectives seem rather different despite your professional relationship. A shadow crossed his expression, suggesting complex circumstances behind their association. Mr. Hadley acquired my services along with several other business assets when he purchased my former employer's railroad construction company. I have found his efficiency methods educational, though sometimes challenging to reconcile with alternative approaches. Catherine detected careful diplomacy in his phrasing, suggesting tensions between his values and his employer's methods. And do you expect to continue this association permanently? That remains to be determined, he replied with quiet reservation. My current obligations require fulfilling contractual commitments, though I confess myself drawn to opportunities that would allow greater autonomy in applying my experience. Before Catherine could respond, they reached the veranda where her father stood waiting with the satisfied expression of a man anticipating profitable negotiations. James Gardner possessed the commanding presence that had built Thornfield Ranch from modest beginnings into one of Colorado's most successful enterprises, his weathered features and direct manner reflecting decades of practical decision-making in challenging circumstances. Mr. Hadley, I trust you have found your inspection of our operations satisfactory, he said, extending a firm handshake that served as both greeting and assessment of character. Indeed, Mr. Gardner. Thornfield's reputation proves thoroughly justified by direct observation, Hadley replied with confident enthusiasm. I believe our discussion will prove mutually beneficial. James nodded approvingly, clearly pleased by Hadley's businesslike approach. Mr. Carmichael, Eleanor tells me you have considerable expertise with railroad construction and cattle operations. I would value your professional assessment of our shipping arrangements and potential improvements. Catherine watched as her father's attention shifted to include Carmichael in serious business discussion, recognizing the respect her father accorded to proven competence regardless of social position. James Gardner had achieved success through recognizing ability wherever he encountered it, though his appreciation for practical merit sometimes conflicted with social conventions regarding appropriate partnerships for his daughter. I would be honored to share my observations, Mr. Gardner, Carmichael replied with genuine respect. Though I should note that Thornfield's current operations appear remarkably well organized for optimal efficiency within existing infrastructure constraints. Catherine felt a surge of pride at his recognition of her family's achievements, particularly since his assessment carried the weight of professional expertise rather than social courtesy. His ability to acknowledge excellence while identifying opportunities for improvement suggested the balanced judgment her father valued in business associates. Excellent, James said with satisfaction. Eleanor, perhaps you would see to refreshments while we gentlemen discuss practical matters in my office. Catherine, I trust you will excuse us for the remainder of the afternoon. Catherine recognized the dismissal that would exclude her from conversations about her own future, though she complied with practiced grace despite her frustration. Of course, father. I shall find occupation with my correspondence until dinner. As the men departed for James's office, Catherine caught a final glance from Carmichael that seemed to carry both sympathy for her exclusion and something deeper that made her pulse quicken unexpectedly. She found herself hoping that whatever discussions transpired in her father's office would not conclude her acquaintance with the most interesting gentleman she had encountered in months of forced courtship. Eleanor bustled about arranging refreshments with obvious satisfaction at the day's progress, humming softly as she supervised Morrison's preparation of her husband's preferred whiskey service. Catherine, I do believe this introduction has proceeded most favorably. Mr. Hadley demonstrates exactly the sort of polish and ambition that will complement our family's position admirably. Catherine settled into her favorite chair near the window where she could observe the stable yards and think without constant maternal supervision. He certainly possesses confidence in his business prospects, mother. Confidence founded upon genuine achievement rather than mere bluster, Eleanor replied approvingly. His family's railroad interests offer precisely the sort of expansion opportunities your father has been seeking. The alliance would position Thornfield advantageously for the next generation of Western development. Catherine nodded absently, though her thoughts kept returning to Carmichael's thoughtful observations and the way his attention had focused on her words rather than evaluating her as a decorative addition to business arrangements. The contrast between his respectful interest and Hadley's casual assumption of her compliance left her feeling unsettled about expectations she had previously accepted without question. "Catherine, you seem rather distracted," Eleanor observed with a sharp perception that had made her an invaluable partner in her husband's business endeavors. "I trust Mr. Hadley's directness has not overwhelmed your sensibilities?" "Not overwhelmed, mother. Perhaps merely surprised by the immediacy of his expectations regarding decisions of such magnitude." Eleanor's expression softened slightly with understanding. Marriage negotiations among families of established position necessarily move more efficiently than romantic courtships among young people of lesser responsibility, dear. Your father and I recognized our mutual suitability quite rapidly and have enjoyed a most successful partnership as a result. Catherine studied her mother's composed features, wondering what private thoughts lay beneath the surface of such practical contentment. "Did you never question whether compatibility of interests could substitute adequately for deeper emotional connection?" "Emotional connection develops naturally between two people of compatible character and shared goals," Eleanor replied with conviction born of experience. "The passionate attachments celebrated in novels prove far less reliable foundations for lifelong partnership than mutual respect and complementary capabilities." Before Catherine could pursue the conversation further, raised voices from her father's office drew their attention toward the closed door that muffled whatever heated discussion was taking place among the gentlemen. Eleanor frowned with concern, clearly troubled by any disruption of what should have been cordial business negotiations. The office door opened abruptly, revealing Hadley's flushed face and Carmichael's carefully controlled expression as they emerged with obviously strained courtesy. James followed, his weathered features showing the irritation of a man accustomed to straightforward dealing confronted with unexpected complications. "Mrs. Gardner, Miss Gardner, I fear circumstances require our earlier departure than anticipated," Hadley announced with tight politeness. "Business matters demand immediate attention in Denver." Catherine felt both relief and curiosity at this unexpected development, though she maintained appropriate expressions of regret at their abbreviated visit. "Mr. Hadley, I hope no serious difficulties have arisen?" "Nothing that cannot be resolved through proper attention to professional obligations," he replied with meaningful emphasis, his gaze including Carmichael in what seemed to be a pointed rebuke. Carmichael stepped forward with quiet dignity. "Miss Gardner, Mrs. Gardner, I deeply appreciate your gracious hospitality. Thornfield Ranch represents everything admirable about Western enterprise and family achievement." His words carried finality that suggested this farewell might be permanent, creating an unexpected pang of loss that surprised Catherine with its intensity. She found herself reluctant to see him depart, just as their acquaintance had begun to develop beyond formal courtesy. "Mr. Carmichael, I hope your travels proceed safely," she said, extending her hand with perhaps more warmth than strict propriety permitted. He clasped her fingers briefly, his touch conveying more than words could express before releasing her hand with obvious reluctance. "Thank you, Miss Gardner. I shall remember this visit as a privilege." As the gentlemen departed with perfunctory courtesies, Catherine watched their carriage disappear down the long drive with emotions she could not entirely understand. The day that had begun with dutiful resignation to another unsuitable suitor had concluded with the departure of a man who had sparked interest she had not expected to feel. Eleanor stood beside her daughter at the window, her expression thoughtful as she observed Catherine's obvious distraction. "Well, that concluded rather more abruptly than anticipated." "Indeed," Catherine replied softly, still watching the distant dust cloud that marked their guest's departure. Her father emerged from his office with the expression of a man whose business instincts had been validated by unpleasant discoveries. "Eleanor, Catherine, it appears we have been spared a most unsuitable alliance through fortunate timing." Catherine turned from the window with sharp attention. "Father, what do you mean?" James settled into his chair with the satisfaction of someone who had avoided a significant mistake. Mr. Hadley's business methods prove rather less honorable than his presentation suggests. His associate Mr. Carmichael possesses integrity that prevented him from remaining silent when discussion turned to specific arrangements that would have compromised Thornfield's interests substantially. Eleanor sank into her chair with obvious shock. "James, are you saying Mr. Hadley was attempting to defraud us?" "Not precisely fraud, though certainly manipulation of contract terms that would have transferred significant control of our operations to his interests while providing minimal actual benefit to our family." James's expression showed the anger of a man who prided himself on recognizing character accurately. Mr. Carmichael's intervention saved us from a most costly error in judgment. Catherine felt a rush of gratitude toward Carmichael for protecting her family's interests despite the obvious professional cost to himself. "Father, what will become of Mr. Carmichael? Surely Mr. Hadley will dismiss him for such interference." "Indeed, which is why I have offered him employment here at Thornfield," James replied with satisfaction. "A man of his integrity and expertise would prove invaluable in expanding our operations properly, rather than sacrificing them to unscrupulous partnerships." Catherine's heart leaped with unexpected joy at the prospect of seeing Carmichael again, though she struggled to maintain composed acceptance of her father's business decision. "How generous of you, father! Though I suppose Mr. Carmichael's obligations to Mr. Hadley might prevent such a change." James smiled with the satisfaction of someone who had anticipated such complications. Mr. Carmichael's contract contained provisions that allow termination under certain circumstances. Mr. Hadley's reaction to having his methods exposed publicly constituted sufficient grounds for immediate release from obligation. Eleanor looked between her husband and daughter with the sharp perception that had served her well in managing family affairs for decades. "Catherine, you seem rather pleased by this development." Catherine felt heat rise in her cheeks, though she attempted to maintain casual interest. "Mr. Carmichael demonstrated admirable character in protecting our family's interests, mother." "Naturally, I appreciate such integrity." "Naturally," Eleanor repeated with the tone of someone recognizing more complex emotions beneath surface explanations. James stood and moved toward his office with obvious satisfaction at the day's resolution. "Mr. Carmichael will return next week to begin his new position. I anticipate his expertise will prove invaluable in developing railroad partnerships that actually benefit Thornfield's interests rather than subordinating them to outside control." As her parents departed to discuss the day's unexpected developments privately, Catherine remained at the window, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. The day had begun with dutiful acceptance of another arranged courtship, and concluded with the prospect of welcoming a man whose character and intelligence had sparked feelings she had not expected to experience. For the first time since her father had begun arranging suitable introductions, Catherine found herself anticipating a gentleman's return with genuine excitement rather than resigned obligation. Whatever complications might arise from Simon Carmichael's employment at Thornfield Ranch, she suspected her life was about to become considerably more interesting than the conventional marriage arrangements her parents had planned. The following Tuesday morning arrived with unseasonable warmth that coaxed early wildflowers from the mountain meadows surrounding Thornfield Ranch. Catherine stood at her bedroom window, ostensibly reviewing household accounts while actually watching the main drive for signs of Simon Carmichael's anticipated arrival. She had spent the intervening days attempting to convince herself that her interest in his return stemmed solely from appreciation of his honorable character, though her racing pulse suggested emotions considerably more complex than gratitude. "Catherine, your preoccupation with that window has become quite pronounced," Eleanor observed from the doorway, her voice carrying the amused tolerance reserved for transparent feminine stratagems. "One might suppose you were expecting someone of particular significance." Catherine turned from her vigil with what she hoped appeared casual composure. "I was merely ensuring that Mr. Carmichael's arrival would not go unnoticed, Mother." Father expressed interest in beginning his consultation regarding railroad improvements immediately. "Indeed," Eleanor replied with the knowing expression of someone who had once been 23 herself. "Your father's business urgency certainly explains such dedicated surveillance." She moved into the room with the purposeful stride that typically preceded maternal guidance sessions. "Catherine, I believe we should discuss certain considerations regarding Mr. Carmichael's employment here." Catherine felt a flutter of anxiety at her mother's serious tone. Has father reconsidered his offer? Surely Mr. Carmichael's integrity in the Hadley matter demonstrates his value as an associate. "Your father's business judgment remains sound," Eleanor assured her, settling into the window seat with deliberate positioning that blocked Catherine's view of the drive. "My concerns involve different matters entirely." She paused with the timing of someone accustomed to commanding attention. "Mr. Carmichael possesses admirable character and considerable expertise, though his social position differs substantially from the gentlemen your father has previously encouraged as suitable companions." Catherine felt defensive warmth rise in her chest at the implied criticism. Mr. Carmichael's character and accomplishments seem far more worthy of respect than Mr. Hadley's inherited advantages and calculating methods. "Character indeed merits respect," Eleanor agreed carefully, "though society distinguishes between professional admiration and personal attachment. Your father employs many men of excellent character, whose social circumstances would render romantic involvement quite inappropriate for a woman of your position." The directness of her mother's concern caught Catherine off guard, though she attempted to maintain casual denial. "Mother, surely you exaggerate my interest in Mr. Carmichael. I have barely made his acquaintance." Eleanor's expression softened with understanding rather than criticism. "Catherine, I have observed you through numerous introductions to eligible gentlemen over the past 2 years. Your response to Mr. Carmichael's presence differs markedly from your dutiful politeness toward other suitors." She reached across to clasp her daughter's hand gently. "Such reactions are natural and not shameful, though they require careful management to avoid complications that could prove painful for everyone involved." Catherine stared down at their joined hands, struggling to articulate feelings she barely understood herself. What if conventional suitability fails to account for qualities that matter more than social position or inherited wealth? "Such questions reflect the romantic idealism of youth," Eleanor replied with gentle firmness. "Though I confess myself sympathetic to such sentiments, practical realities cannot be ignored indefinitely." She squeezed Catherine's fingers before releasing them. "Marriage between significantly different social classes creates difficulties that love alone rarely overcomes successfully. The daily pressures of maintaining position, managing social obligations, and raising children within established society require compatible backgrounds and shared expectations." Before Catherine could respond to her mother's sobering assessment, the sound of approaching horses drew their attention toward the window. A single rider approached the main house, his practical clothes and confident horsemanship immediately identifying Simon Carmichael despite the distance. Catherine's heart accelerated with anticipation mixed with nervousness about their first encounter since his dramatic departure with Hadley. "He rides well," Eleanor observed with grudging approval. "Your father mentioned that Mr. Carmichael's experience includes cattle driving and construction supervision. Such versatility suggests considerable competence." Catherine watched as Carmichael dismounted near the stables, his movements displaying the easy familiarity with horses that marked genuine Western experience rather than fashionable riding lessons. Even from a distance, his presence seemed to energize the ranch activities as stable hands approached with obvious respect for his expertise. "Perhaps I should inform father of Mr. Carmichael's arrival," Catherine suggested with carefully casual tone. Eleanor's smile suggested transparent motivation. "Perhaps you should, though I suspect your father has already been notified through more direct channels." She rose from the window seat with maternal indulgence. "Catherine, enjoy your renewed acquaintance with Mr. Carmichael, though remember that employment relationships require different boundaries than social courtship." Catherine nodded absently, her attention already shifting toward preparing for an encounter she had anticipated with equal measures of excitement and uncertainty. She selected a morning dress of soft blue wool that complemented her eyes while maintaining appropriate simplicity for receiving a business associate rather than a formal suitor. Descending to the main floor, Catherine found her father emerging from his office with the satisfied expression of someone whose expectations had been confirmed. "Catherine, Mr. Carmichael has arrived and proven even more impressive than my initial assessment suggested. His recommendations regarding our shipping arrangements demonstrate expertise that will save us considerable expense while improving efficiency." "How gratifying, Father," Catherine replied, hoping her voice conveyed appropriate interest in business matters rather than personal excitement. "Will he be taking residence here at the ranch?" "Indeed, we have arranged accommodation in the guest quarters above the stable office," James confirmed. "The proximity will facilitate consultation regarding daily operations while maintaining appropriate professional boundaries." He paused with the thoughtful expression that typically preceded paternal guidance. "Catherine, I trust you understand that Mr. Carmichael's employment here requires maintaining certain distinctions despite our family's appreciation of his character." Catherine felt irritation flash at the implicit restrictions, though she maintained dutiful composure. "Naturally, Father. Though surely common courtesy permits normal social interaction with a gentleman of proven integrity." James studied his daughter's expression with a shrewd perception that had served him well in evaluating both business associates and potential sons-in-law. "Common courtesy, certainly. Though I suspect your interest in Mr. Carmichael extends beyond conventional politeness." His tone carried understanding rather than criticism. "Catherine, the man possesses admirable qualities that any father would value in a potential husband. However, his current circumstances would create significant complications for a marriage involving our family's position and responsibilities." "What sort of complications?" Catherine asked with perhaps more direct challenge than filial respect typically permitted. "Financial independence represents only the beginning," James explained patiently. "Your husband will eventually inherit responsibility for Thornfield's operations, community leadership obligations, and political connections that extend throughout the territory. Such roles require social preparation and established relationships that Mr. Carmichael, despite his excellence in other areas, has not had opportunity to develop." Before Catherine could formulate a response to her father's practical concerns, Morrison appeared in the doorway with formal announcement. "Mr. Carmichael requests permission to pay his respects to the family before beginning his duties, sir." "Send him in immediately," James replied with genuine warmth. "Catherine, perhaps you would ask your mother to join us for a proper welcome." Catherine hurried to locate Eleanor, her pulse quickening with anticipation of seeing Carmichael again after their brief but memorable first encounter. She found her mother in the morning room, reviewing menus with the cook, and quickly conveyed her father's request. "Certainly, dear," Eleanor replied, dismissing the cook with efficient courtesy. "Though Catherine, perhaps you might temper your obvious excitement slightly? Excessive enthusiasm toward male employees can create uncomfortable misunderstandings." Catherine felt heat rise in her cheeks at her mother's gentle rebuke, though she attempted to compose herself appropriately as they returned to the main drawing room. Carmichael stood near the fireplace, conversing quietly with her father about ranch operations, his manner demonstrating respectful attention combined with confident expertise. He turned as they entered, his expression brightening with obvious pleasure at seeing Catherine again. "Mrs. Gardner, Miss Gardner, I am deeply grateful for your family's generous hospitality in offering me employment here. Mr. Carmichael, we are delighted to welcome you to Thornfield officially," Eleanor replied with practiced graciousness. "I trust your journey from Denver proceeded without difficulty?" "Quite smoothly, thank you," Carmichael confirmed, though his attention kept drifting toward Catherine with unmistakable warmth. "The countryside between here and the railroad terminus offers remarkable beauty, though none so striking as Thornfield itself." Catherine felt her breath catch at the subtle compliment, though she maintained appropriate composure despite her racing heart. "We have been blessed with exceptional natural advantages, Mr. Carmichael. Though I suspect your professional eye evaluates our landscape rather differently than mere aesthetic appreciation. Professional assessment certainly occupies part of my attention, he agreed with a smile that suggested deeper considerations. Though beauty serves important purposes beyond mere decoration. The morale of workers, the pride of ownership, and the overall satisfaction of life in such surroundings contribute significantly to operational success. James nodded approvingly at this practical justification for aesthetic values. Precisely the sort of comprehensive thinking I hoped you would bring to our operations, Carmichael. Too many business advisors focus narrowly on immediate profits without considering broader factors that influence long-term prosperity. Experience has taught me that sustainable success requires balancing multiple considerations, Carmichael replied, his gaze meeting Catherine's briefly before returning to her father. The most profitable enterprises typically prove to be those where all participants find satisfaction in their roles and environment. Eleanor observed the subtle interplay between Catherine and Carmichael with the perceptive attention of someone skilled at reading social undercurrents. Mr. Carmichael, perhaps Catherine might show you the aspects of our operations that relate to household management and community relations? Your comprehensive approach would benefit from understanding how ranch business integrates with domestic responsibilities. Catherine felt grateful for her mother's tactful provision of time alone with Carmichael, though she recognized the subtle test involved in observing their interaction under apparently innocent circumstances. I would be pleased to provide such a tour, Mr. Carmichael, if your schedule permits. I would consider it an honor, Miss Gardner, Carmichael replied with obvious sincerity. Understanding the complete scope of operations seems essential for providing useful recommendations. As they departed for the promised tour, Catherine led Carmichael toward the kitchen gardens and domestic work areas that supported the ranch's large community of employees and their families. The proximity allowed quiet conversation away from parental observation, though Catherine remained conscious of maintaining appropriate boundaries despite her excitement at their renewed acquaintance. Mr. Carmichael, I must express gratitude for your intervention in the matter of Mr. Hadley's proposals, she said as they walked among the vegetable plots tended by ranch wives. Father indicated that your honesty prevented our family from entering a most disadvantageous arrangement. Carmichael's expression darkened slightly at the mention of his former employer. Miss Gardner, I regret that professional obligations initially prevented me from warning your family more directly about Hadley's methods. His approach to business often prioritizes short-term advantages over ethical considerations. Surely you cannot be held responsible for your employer's character, Catherine protested. Your ultimate choice to protect our interests despite personal cost demonstrates admirable integrity. Personal cost proved minimal compared to allowing honorable people to suffer from association with dishonorable practices, Carmichael replied firmly. Though I confess the situation created considerable anxiety about my future prospects until your father's generous offer resolved such concerns. Catherine felt emboldened by his reference to personal considerations. You must have found employment with Mr. Hadley quite difficult if your values conflicted so significantly with his methods. Carmichael paused beside a fence overlooking the horse pastures, his expression thoughtful as he considered her question. Professional necessity sometimes requires accepting imperfect situations, Miss Gardner. My obligations to family members dependent upon my income limited my freedom to choose employers based purely on personal preference. Family obligations? Catherine asked with curiosity that surprised her with its intensity. My mother and younger sister require ongoing financial support since my father's death several years ago, Carmichael explained. Their circumstances prevented me from refusing employment opportunities, regardless of my reservations about particular business practices. Catherine felt a warm rush of respect for his dedication to family responsibility, though she also experienced unexpected relief that his obligations involved relatives rather than a wife. How admirable that you prioritize their welfare above your own preferences. Though surely your expertise would attract offers from more honorable employers. One would hope, Carmichael agreed with a rueful smile. Though opportunities for advancement in ethical enterprises prove somewhat limited for men without established family connections or inherited advantages. He turned to face her directly, his expression serious. "Miss Gardner, your father's offer represents not merely employment but the possibility of building something meaningful rather than merely earning wages." "Building something meaningful," Catherine repeated, intrigued by his phrasing. "What sort of something?" Carmichael's eyes took on the distant focus of someone envisioning future possibilities. "A ranch operation that demonstrates how business success can be achieved through honorable methods. Railroad partnerships that benefit all parties rather than exploiting the weaker position. Community development that improves life for everyone involved rather than concentrating advantages among the few." Catherine found herself drawn into his vision of ethical enterprise that contrasted sharply with the calculating opportunism she had observed in other business associates her father had considered. "You speak as though such approaches represent innovation rather than normal business practice." "Unfortunately, honorable business methods often prove exceptional rather than standard," Carmichael replied with apparent regret. "Though I believe the long-term advantages of ethical approaches ultimately exceed the short-term profits possible through exploitation." Their conversation was interrupted by the approach of Miguel Santos, the ranch foreman whose family had worked for the Gardners for over a decade. His weathered face showed the respectful attention typically reserved for individuals whose expertise he valued professionally. "Miss Catherine, your father asked me to show Mr. Carmichael the shipping facilities and discuss our arrangements with the railroad companies," Miguel said with formal courtesy. "Though if you are still conducting your tour, I can return later." "Please proceed with your business, Miguel," Catherine replied, recognizing the importance of Carmichael's professional orientation despite her reluctance to conclude their private conversation. "Mr. Carmichael, I hope you find our facilities adequate for your recommendations." "I am certain they will prove most instructive, Miss Gardner," Carmichael said with obvious regret at their separation. "Perhaps we might continue our discussion at another time?" "I would welcome such an opportunity," Catherine confirmed, her heart racing at the implicit promise of future private conversation. As Carmichael departed with Miguel toward the rail loading facilities, Catherine remained in the garden, reflecting on their exchange with emotions she struggled to categorize. His combination of integrity, intelligence, and genuine concern for ethical business practices created an appeal that transcended mere physical attraction, though she could not deny her body's response to his presence. The remainder of the day passed with Catherine finding excuses to observe Carmichael's activities from various vantage points around the ranch complex. She watched as he examined shipping records with Miguel, consulted with stablemasters about horse breeding programs, and spent considerable time reviewing financial documents with her father in the ranch office. His thorough approach and respectful manner with all employees, regardless of their position, impressed everyone who worked with him. At dinner, Eleanor had arranged seating that included Carmichael at the family table, acknowledging his position as more than a mere employee while maintaining appropriate distinctions from social equals. Catherine found herself grateful for this diplomatic solution that allowed extended conversation while preserving propriety. "Mr. Carmichael, what are your initial impressions of our operations?" James inquired as Morrison served the evening's main course. "Thoroughly impressive, Mr. Gardner," Carmichael replied with genuine enthusiasm. "The integration of cattle raising, agricultural production, and support services demonstrates remarkable organizational sophistication. Your shipping arrangements with 3 different railroad companies provide advantageous flexibility that many larger operations lack." Eleanor smiled with satisfaction at the validation of her family's achievements. James has always believed in maintaining multiple options rather than depending exclusively upon single partnerships. "Precisely wise," Carmichael agreed. "Though I believe certain modifications to your current contracts could improve profitability substantially while reducing transportation risks." Catherine found herself leaning forward with interest despite the technical nature of the discussion. "What sort of modifications, Mr. Carmichael?" "The seasonal pricing variations imposed by railroad companies often penalize ranchers unfairly," Carmichael explained, his attention focusing entirely on her question. "However, coordinated shipping schedules among multiple ranch operations could provide negotiating leverage for more favorable year-round rates." James set down his fork with obvious interest. "Coordinated among different ranches, you mean?" That would require considerable organization and mutual trust among competing operations. Indeed, though the potential benefits justify the organizational effort, Carmichael confirmed. European cooperative marketing associations have demonstrated significant advantages for agricultural producers through collective negotiation with transportation and processing companies. Catherine felt excitement building at the innovative thinking behind his suggestions. Such cooperation would benefit the entire community rather than merely individual operations. "Exactly, Miss Gardner," Carmichael said with obvious approval of her understanding. Sustainable prosperity typically requires community-wide improvement rather than individual advantage gained at neighbors' expense. Eleanor observed the animated exchange between Catherine and Carmichael with expressions that suggested both approval and concern. "Mr. Carmichael, your approach to business reflects admirable social consciousness. Though I wonder whether competing ranchers would embrace cooperation rather than pursuing individual advantages." "Initial resistance seems likely," Carmichael acknowledged. "Though demonstrating concrete benefits through pilot programs often overcomes theoretical objections. Your family's reputation for integrity would provide crucial leadership in organizing such cooperation." James nodded thoughtfully. "Worth serious consideration, certainly. Catherine, you have always shown interest in community relations. What are your thoughts regarding neighborly cooperation versus competitive independence?" Catherine felt gratified by her father's inclusion of her opinions in serious business discussion. Surely the strongest communities develop through mutual support rather than constant competition. Our neighbors' prosperity ultimately contributes to our own success through improved transportation, better schools, and more stable local markets. "Precisely reasoned," Carmichael said with warm approval that made Catherine's pulse quicken. Enlightened self-interest supports community development rather than opposing it. The conversation continued through the remainder of dinner, ranging across topics from railroad development to territorial politics to educational opportunities for ranch children. Catherine found herself increasingly impressed by Carmichael's breadth of knowledge and his ability to connect seemingly disparate subjects into coherent strategies for community improvement. After dinner, Eleanor suggested coffee in the drawing room, though James requested private consultation with Carmichael regarding specific contract modifications. Catherine felt disappointed at their separation, though she recognized the importance of his professional obligations to her father. "Catherine, walk with me in the garden," Eleanor said as the gentleman departed for the ranch office. "The evening air will provide pleasant relief from the day's warmth." Catherine accompanied her mother outside, though she sensed an agenda beyond appreciation of the sunset's beauty. They walked in comfortable silence until Eleanor paused beside the rose arbor that provided both fragrance and privacy from the house windows. "Mr. Carmichael has proven as impressive as your father anticipated," Eleanor began with careful neutrality. "His expertise clearly exceeds typical business advisors, and his character demonstrates genuine integrity." "Indeed," Catherine agreed cautiously, uncertain of her mother's direction. "Catherine, I have observed your responses to Mr. Carmichael's presence and conversation throughout the day," Eleanor continued with gentle directness. "Your interest in him appears to extend considerably beyond appreciation of his professional qualifications." Catherine felt defensive warmth rise despite her mother's understanding tone. "Mr. Carmichael possesses qualities that any reasonable person would find admirable, mother." "Certainly, though your particular admiration suggests emotions that could prove problematic if not managed carefully," Eleanor replied with maternal concern rather than criticism. "Catherine, romantic attachment to men whose social circumstances differ significantly from our own creates complications that extend far beyond the individuals involved. What if social circumstances reflect accidents of birth rather than true merit?" Catherine challenged with growing frustration. "Surely character and capability matter more than inherited advantages?" Eleanor sighed with the weariness of someone who had wrestled with similar questions herself decades earlier. "Character and capability indeed matter enormously, dear. Though society's expectations regarding appropriate marriages involve considerations beyond individual merit." She paused, choosing her words carefully. Your future husband must be acceptable not merely to you and our family, but to the broader community whose support enables our continued prosperity and influence. Must I sacrifice personal happiness to maintain social position? Catherine asked with barely controlled emotion. Not sacrifice precisely, Eleanor replied with gentle firmness. Though balance personal preferences against practical necessities that affect your entire future rather than merely immediate desires. She reached out to touch Catherine's arm reassuringly. Catherine, I married your father through arrangement rather than romantic attachment. Our partnership has proven deeply satisfying through mutual respect, shared goals, and compatible temperaments. Love developed naturally through years of working together toward common purposes. Catherine stared across the darkening landscape, struggling with conflicting emotions about duty, desire, and the practical realities her mother described so convincingly. Did you never wonder about alternative possibilities, Mother? About what might have developed with someone whose character attracted you more immediately? Eleanor was quiet for several moments before responding with unusual vulnerability. Everyone experiences such wondering, Catherine. Though maturity teaches us that lasting happiness typically develops through building something meaningful with a compatible partner rather than pursuing passionate attractions that may prove ephemeral. Before Catherine could respond to her mother's revelations, masculine voices approached from the direction of the ranch office, indicating the conclusion of her father's consultation with Carmichael. Catherine felt her pulse accelerate with anticipation of seeing him again, despite her mother's sobering reminders about practical limitations. Catherine, Eleanor said quietly as the men's voices grew closer, enjoy Mr. Carmichael's company and learn from his excellent character. Though remember that employment relationships require different boundaries than courtship, regardless of personal inclinations. Catherine nodded reluctantly, understanding her mother's wisdom while resenting the restrictions that social conventions imposed upon natural emotional development. As Carmichael appeared in the garden with her father, his expression brightening with obvious pleasure at encountering her again, Catherine felt torn between gratitude for his presence and frustration at the artificial barriers that prevented honest exploration of their mutual attraction. Miss Gardner, Mrs. Gardner, Carmichael said with respectful greeting, though his attention lingered on Catherine with unmistakable warmth. I hope you have enjoyed the evening's pleasant weather. Indeed, Mr. Carmichael, Catherine replied, hoping her voice conveyed appropriate casualness despite her racing heart. Father, I trust your consultation proved productive? Remarkably so, James confirmed with obvious satisfaction. Mr. Carmichael's recommendations will require careful implementation, though the potential benefits justify considerable effort. He paused with the thoughtful expression that typically preceded significant announcements. Catherine, I have asked Mr. Carmichael to prepare comprehensive proposals for community cooperation initiatives. Such work will require extensive consultation with neighboring ranchers and territorial officials. Catherine felt a mixture of excitement and anxiety at the prospect of Carmichael's extended presence combined with increased responsibilities that would limit their opportunities for personal interaction. How long do you anticipate such preparation requiring? Several months at minimum, Carmichael replied, his gaze meeting hers with obvious significance. Though I confess myself grateful for the opportunity to contribute to something meaningful rather than merely earning wages. Eleanor cleared her throat gently, drawing attention to the lengthening shadows that indicated approaching bedtime. Gentlemen, perhaps we should conclude this evening's discussions? Tomorrow will bring early responsibilities for everyone. As they prepared to separate for the night, Carmichael hesitated beside Catherine with obvious reluctance to end their interaction. Miss Gardner, might I hope for your assistance in understanding community social dynamics as I develop these cooperation proposals? Your insights regarding neighborly relationships would prove invaluable. Catherine's heart leaped with joy at the prospect of legitimate collaboration that would provide extended opportunities for private conversation. I would be honored to assist in any way possible, Mr. Carmichael. Eleanor's expression showed resigned acceptance of arrangements that maintained appropriate professional boundaries while accommodating obvious mutual attraction. Catherine's knowledge of community relationships would indeed prove useful for such work. As Carmichael departed toward his quarters above the stable office, Catherine watched his retreating figure with emotions that combined excitement, anticipation, and growing awareness that her feelings had developed far beyond simple appreciation of admirable character. Whatever complications might arise from their professional collaboration, she suspected the coming months would test her ability to maintain appropriate boundaries while exploring the most compelling attraction she had ever experienced. Standing in the garden with her parents, Catherine felt the weight of social expectations balanced against the promise of meaningful connection with someone whose character and intelligence challenged her assumptions about suitable partnerships. Tomorrow would begin a period of working closely with Simon Carmichael on projects that mattered to both of them, creating opportunities for the kind of deeper acquaintance that conventional courtship rarely permitted. For the first time since reaching marriageable age, Catherine found herself anticipating the future with genuine excitement rather than dutiful resignation, regardless of the complications that might arise from following her heart rather than accepting conventional arrangements. 3 months of working alongside Simon Carmichael had transformed Catherine's understanding of both business operations and her own heart's capacity for attachment. Their collaboration on community cooperation initiatives had provided countless hours of conversation, shared meals during travel to neighboring ranches, and moments of accidental physical contact that left her pulse racing with awareness she could no longer deny or dismiss as mere appreciation of admirable character. The October morning brought news that would shatter the comfortable routine they had established. Catherine stood at her bedroom window, reading a letter that had arrived with the dawn mail delivery, her hands trembling as she absorbed the implications of her Aunt Cordelia's precise penmanship from Boston. "My dearest Catherine," the letter began with ominous formality, "I write to inform you of developments that require immediate attention to your matrimonial prospects. Through my connections in Denver society, I have learned of your family's association with a certain Mr. Carmichael, whose background, while perhaps professionally adequate, renders him entirely unsuitable for romantic consideration by a young woman of your position." Catherine's heart sank as she continued reading her aunt's detailed exposition of social proprieties and family obligations. Cordelia Gardner Preston had married advantageously into Boston banking circles and considered herself the family's authority on appropriate matches for the next generation. Furthermore, the letter continued relentlessly, "I have taken the liberty of arranging an introduction with Mr. Jonathan Morrison, heir to Morrison Shipping Enterprises and a gentleman whose character, fortune, and social position render him ideally suited to alliance with our family. Mr. Morrison will arrive at Thornfield next Thursday, expecting to formalize engagement arrangements with appropriate expedition." Catherine sank into her chair, overwhelmed by the collision between her aunt's machinations and the emotional reality of her growing attachment to Simon. The prospect of marriage to another calculating businessman while her heart belonged elsewhere seemed unbearable, yet she recognized the family pressures that had prompted Cordelia's intervention. A soft knock at her door interrupted her distressed contemplation. "Catherine, dear," Eleanor's voice called with unusual gentleness, "might I speak with you? Your father has received correspondence that requires family discussion." Catherine opened the door to find her mother's expression combining sympathy with resigned determination. "You have heard from Aunt Cordelia as well, I assume?" Eleanor nodded gravely. "She wrote to both your father and myself, expressing concern about your association with Mr. Carmichael." She entered the room and closed the door behind her, creating privacy for difficult conversation. "Catherine, I must ask directly, have your feelings toward Mr. Carmichael developed beyond professional collaboration?" Catherine felt tears threaten as she struggled with the impossibility of denying emotions that had become central to her daily happiness. "Mother, I cannot claim indifference to his character and company." "I suspected as much," Eleanor replied with gentle understanding rather than criticism. "Your behavior over recent months has reflected the contentment of someone whose affections have found worthy focus." She moved to sit beside Catherine on the window seat. "Catherine, Mr. Carmichael possesses every quality I would desire in a son-in-law, save those circumstances of birth and fortune that society deems essential for our family's position. Must society's opinions outweigh personal happiness and genuine compatibility?" Catherine asked with rising desperation. Eleanor sighed with the weariness of someone who had wrestled with similar conflicts throughout her own life. "Personal happiness matters enormously, dear, though it must be balanced against responsibilities that extend beyond individual preferences. She paused, choosing her words carefully. Your marriage will affect not merely your own future, but your father's business relationships, your eventual children's prospects, and our family's ability to maintain the position that enables us to support dozens of employees and their families. Before Catherine could respond to her mother's sobering assessment, masculine voices in the courtyard below drew their attention toward the window. James Gardner stood in animated conversation with Simon Carmichael near the main barn, their body language suggesting serious disagreement rather than routine business consultation. "Oh dear," Eleanor murmured with obvious concern. "I fear your father has already begun addressing the complications that Cordelia's letter has created." Catherine watched with growing anxiety as her father's gestures became increasingly emphatic, while Simon's posture reflected the careful control of someone absorbing unwelcome information. Even from a distance, she could observe the tension that had replaced their usual collaborative rapport. "Mother, what will happen to Mr. Carmichael's employment if father decides his presence creates unsuitable complications?" Eleanor's expression showed genuine regret. "Your father values Mr. Carmichael's expertise tremendously, though family considerations may require adjustments to his responsibilities here." She stood with decision. "Catherine, perhaps you should prepare yourself for Mr. Morrison's arrival on Thursday. Regardless of your personal inclinations, courtesy requires proper reception of a gentleman who has traveled considerable distance at your family's invitation." Catherine felt trapped between duty and desire, understanding her family's practical concerns while resenting the social conventions that prevented honest exploration of her feelings for Simon. "Mother, might I speak with Mr. Carmichael before Mr. Morrison's arrival? If our friendship must conclude, surely I owe him explanation rather than sudden abandonment." Eleanor considered this request with obvious internal conflict. "Catherine, such conversation risks deepening attachments that practical circumstances prevent from developing further." She paused, studying her daughter's distressed expression. "Though perhaps honest discussion would prove less painful than unresolved uncertainty for both of you." Relief flooded through Catherine at her mother's unexpected understanding. "Thank you, Mother. I promise to conduct myself with appropriate propriety." "I have no doubt of your good intentions, dear," Eleanor replied with gentle irony. "Though emotions sometimes overwhelm propriety despite our best efforts." She moved toward the door, then paused with final maternal guidance. "Catherine, remember that lasting happiness typically requires building something sustainable rather than pursuing attractions that society renders impossible to maintain." After her mother's departure, Catherine spent the morning struggling with anticipation and anxiety about her planned conversation with Simon. Their recent work together had created intimacy that transcended professional boundaries, though neither had acknowledged their feelings directly. The prospect of confronting emotions they had carefully avoided discussing filled her with equal measures of excitement and dread. The opportunity for private conversation arrived during the afternoon when Simon requested consultation regarding shipping arrangements that required reviewing documents in the ranch office. Catherine found him alone among the ledgers and correspondence that had occupied so much of their collaborative effort over recent months. "Miss Gardner," he said, rising immediately upon her entrance with a formal courtesy that had gradually given way to warmer familiarity during their working relationship. "I appreciate your assistance with these railroad contracts, though I confess uncertainty about my continued authority to negotiate such arrangements." Catherine detected underlying tension in his voice that suggested awareness of morning's difficult conversation with her father. "Mr. Carmichael, has my father indicated changes to your responsibilities here?" Simon's expression showed careful control over emotions that threatened to break through professional composure. "Mr. Gardner has expressed concern that my appreciation for certain aspects of life at Thornfield may have exceeded appropriate professional boundaries." He paused, studying her face with obvious longing. "Catherine, I believe he refers to my entirely inappropriate but undeniable regard for his daughter." Catherine felt her heart race at his direct acknowledgement of feelings they had danced around for months. "Simon, such regard is not entirely one-sided." He stepped closer with obvious internal struggle between desire and propriety. "Catherine, Please understand that I would never presume to compromise your position or create difficulties with your family. His voice carried pain that reflected awareness of insurmountable obstacles. Your father has made clear that continued employment here requires maintaining strict professional boundaries that exclude personal attachment. And if such boundaries prove impossible to maintain? Catherine asked with growing boldness. Simon's control finally broke as he reached out to clasp her hands with desperate tenderness. Then I must find employment elsewhere rather than create scandal that would damage your reputation and your family's position. He raised her fingers to his lips with reverent gentleness. Catherine, you represent everything beautiful and worthy in this world. I cannot allow my selfish desires to compromise your future happiness. Catherine felt tears spring to her eyes at his noble self-sacrifice combined with passionate declaration. Simon, what if my happiness depends more upon your presence than upon maintaining social position? You cannot know the realities of reduced circumstances, he replied with gentle firmness, though his hands tightened around hers. Marriage between us would require abandoning everything you have known, living on uncertain wages, facing social ostracism that would affect our children's prospects. His voice broke slightly. I love you too much to ask such sacrifices, regardless of my own desires. Before Catherine could respond to his anguished confession, the sound of approaching horses drew their attention toward the window overlooking the main drive. An elaborate carriage bearing Denver markings approached the house with the confident speed of expected arrival. Mr. Morrison, I presume, Simon said with bitter resignation, releasing Catherine's hands and stepping back to appropriate professional distance. Your future husband arrives early for formal introduction. Catherine felt panic rise at the prospect of meeting another calculating suitor while her heart remained entirely committed to Simon. He is not my future husband unless I choose to accept his proposals. Catherine, your family's expectations and social pressures will make rejection extraordinarily difficult, Simon warned with painful understanding of her circumstances. Morrison possesses every advantage that society values, while I offer only uncertain prospects and social complications. You offer integrity, intelligence, and genuine affection, Catherine replied with passionate conviction. Surely such qualities matter more than inherited advantages? Simon's expression showed both gratitude for her faith and resignation to practical realities. In an ideal world, perhaps. Though we must navigate circumstances as they exist, rather than as we wish them to be. The conversation was interrupted by Morrison's announcement at the office door, his formal presence immediately altering the atmosphere with uncomfortable awareness of social hierarchies and competing claims upon Catherine's future. Miss Gardner, Morrison intoned with the practiced charm of someone accustomed to favorable reception, I am delighted to make your acquaintance at last. Your aunt's descriptions, though glowing, prove inadequate to reality. Catherine managed appropriate courtesies despite her inner turmoil, observing Morrison's confident assessment of her person and surroundings with a calculating attention she had learned to recognize in ambitious suitors. His manner suggested comfortable assumption that their introduction represented mere formality preceding inevitable engagement. Mr. Morrison, welcome to Thornfield, she replied with carefully maintained composure. I trust your journey from Denver proceeded comfortably? Indeed, though the anticipation of meeting Colorado's most accomplished young lady made every mile seem lengthy, Morrison replied with practiced gallantry that felt artificial compared to Simon's sincere expressions. Simon cleared his throat with obvious discomfort. Miss Gardner, perhaps I should postpone our business consultation to allow proper attention to your guest? Catherine felt desperate to maintain connection with Simon despite Morrison's commanding presence. Mr. Carmichael, surely our railroad arrangements require completion before tomorrow's deadlines? Morrison's attention focused on Simon with the sharp assessment of someone evaluating potential competition. Mr. Carmichael, I assume? Your reputation for business expertise precedes you, though I understand your current employment involves rather mundane operational concerns. Catherine detected the subtle dismissal underlying Morrison's polite inquiry, though Simon responded with dignified professionalism that refused to acknowledge the slight. My responsibilities encompass comprehensive operational improvement, Mr. Morrison. I find such work quite satisfying. Admirable dedication to practical matters, Morrison replied with condescending approval. Though naturally, gentlemen of broader social responsibility must address larger strategic concerns. He turned his attention pointedly toward Catherine. Miss Gardner, perhaps you might show me your family's achievements while Mr. Carmichael attends to his operational duties? Catherine felt torn between social obligation to receive her guest courteously and desperate desire to continue her interrupted conversation with Simon. Certainly, Mr. Morrison, though I should mention that Mr. Carmichael has developed our most innovative strategic initiatives. His comprehensive approach integrates operational efficiency with community development in remarkable ways. Morrison's expression showed polite skepticism about significant strategic thinking from someone in Simon's position. How interesting! Though naturally, implementation of such strategies requires authority and resources that operational employees rarely possess. Simon's jaw tightened at Morrison's casual dismissal, though he maintained professional composure. Miss Gardner, I shall review those contracts independently and report my conclusions tomorrow. His eyes met hers with obvious reluctance to leave her alone with Morrison. Mr. Morrison, I hope you find Thornfield's achievements impressive. As Simon departed with careful dignity, Catherine felt bereft of his supportive presence while facing Morrison's confident courtship alone. She led her unwelcome suitor toward the gardens that had become her refuge during difficult emotional periods, hoping that familiar surroundings would provide strength for the ordeal ahead. Miss Gardner, your family's ranch represents exactly the sort of substantial enterprise that complements shipping interests advantageously. Morrison began with business-like directness that reminded Catherine unpleasantly of Hadley's calculating approach. The integration of our families through marriage would create opportunities for expanded operations throughout the Western Territories. Catherine felt exhausted by repeated exposure to suitors who evaluated her as an asset in business transactions rather than a person with independent worth. Mr. Morrison, surely personal compatibility matters as much as business advantages in marriage considerations? Morrison smiled with patronizing confidence. Personal compatibility develops naturally between people of similar breeding and social position, Miss Gardner. Shared backgrounds and compatible expectations provide far more reliable foundations than temporary romantic attractions. You dismiss romantic attachment as merely temporary? Catherine asked with rising irritation. Romantic sentiment represents pleasant decoration for relationships founded upon practical compatibility, Morrison replied with the assurance of someone whose opinions had rarely been challenged. Mature adults recognize that lasting satisfaction derives from mutual respect, shared social obligations, and complementary capabilities rather than ephemeral emotional excitement. Catherine stared at him with growing dislike for his cold reduction of marriage to mere business arrangement. Mr. Morrison, have you ever experienced romantic attachment yourself? His expression showed mild surprise at her direct question. I have enjoyed pleasant associations with several accomplished young ladies, naturally. Though I have always maintained proper perspective about the relationship between sentiment and practical necessity. He paused with obvious satisfaction. Miss Gardner, your aunt has indicated your family's receptiveness to immediate engagement. I propose we conclude arrangements expeditiously and announce our betrothal before I return to Denver next week. Catherine felt trapped by the pressure of his assumption combined with family expectations that had brought him to Thornfield. Mr. Morrison, such momentous decisions require careful consideration rather than hasty resolution. Consideration, certainly, Morrison agreed with decreasing patience. Though prolonged delay serves no useful purpose when practical advantages are obvious to all concerned parties. His tone took on subtle threat. Miss Gardner, opportunities of this caliber require prompt acceptance. My business commitments and social position could attract numerous advantageous offers elsewhere. Before Catherine could respond to what amounted to ultimatum, her father appeared on the garden path with expression combining relief and determination. Morrison, there you are. I trust Catherine has made you feel welcome at Thornfield. Indeed, Mr. Gardner. Morrison replied with renewed confidence. Miss Gardner and I have been discussing the arrangements that bring me here. I believe we can conclude matters satisfactorily with appropriate expedition. James's expression showed satisfaction mixed with concern as he observed Catherine's obvious distress. Excellent. Morrison, perhaps you would join me for whiskey while we discuss specific terms? Catherine, your mother requests your presence for consultation regarding dinner arrangements. Catherine felt grateful for her father's tactful separation of business negotiations from her immediate presence, though she recognized that such discussions would determine her future regardless of her personal preferences. As Morrison departed with obvious anticipation of favorable terms, Catherine remained in the garden struggling with desperation about circumstances spiraling beyond her control. The evening passed with elaborate dinner conversation during which Morrison dominated discussion with detailed exposition of his business achievements and social connections. Catherine found herself comparing his calculating ambition unfavorably with Simon's thoughtful idealism, though she maintained appropriate courtesy despite her growing aversion to her suitor's character. After Morrison's retirement to the guest quarters, Catherine found herself alone with her parents in the drawing room where the evening's performance had left everyone exhausted by social obligations. Catherine, James began with unusual hesitancy, Morrison has proposed terms that prove quite generous to our family's interests. The alliance would provide significant advantages for Thornfield's expansion while ensuring your security and social position. Catherine felt the weight of family expectations pressing upon her with suffocating intensity. Father, I cannot claim enthusiasm for Mr. Morrison's character or company. Eleanor moved to sit beside her daughter with maternal sympathy. Catherine, enthusiasm often develops through shared experiences and mutual respect rather than immediate attraction. She paused thoughtfully. Though I confess myself concerned by Morrison's rather calculating approach to personal relationships. James looked surprised by his wife's reservation. Eleanor, surely practical considerations deserve priority in such important decisions? Practical considerations matter enormously, Eleanor agreed carefully. Though a marriage entirely devoid of genuine affection often proves unsatisfying for both parties despite external advantages. She studied Catherine's distressed expression. Catherine, do you find Morrison's character actively objectionable, or merely uninspiring compared to alternative possibilities? Catherine recognized her mother's diplomatic reference to Simon while providing opportunity for honest expression of her feelings. Mother, I find his reduction of marriage to mere business transaction deeply troubling. His dismissal of romantic attachment as irrelevant decoration suggests an approach to relationships that I cannot embrace enthusiastically. James frowned with obvious concern about practical implications of Catherine's resistance. Catherine, Morrison represents exactly the sort of alliance that will secure your future and advance our family's position. Personal preferences must be balanced against responsibilities that extend beyond individual desires. Must I sacrifice personal happiness entirely to fulfill family obligations? Catherine asked with rising emotion. Before James could respond to his daughter's challenge, Morrison's voice called from the hallway with obvious excitement. Mr. Gardner, might I speak with you urgently? I have received correspondence that requires immediate discussion. Morrison entered the drawing room with barely contained agitation, clutching a telegram that had apparently arrived with the evening mail delivery. Mr. Gardner, I have just learned that my business partners in Denver have discovered certain irregularities in our accounts that demand my immediate return to address potential scandal. James stood with sharp attention to this unexpected development. Morrison, what sort of irregularities? Nothing that cannot be resolved through proper attention, Morrison replied with decreasing confidence. Though my absence from Denver while such matters require resolution could prove problematic for my business reputation. He turned toward Catherine with obvious reluctance. Miss Gardner, I fear these circumstances require postponing our engagement announcement until such complications are satisfactorily addressed. Catherine felt relief flood through her at this unexpected reprieve, though she maintained appropriate expressions of concern for Morrison's difficulties. Mr. Morrison, I hope such matters prove less serious than initially feared. Indeed, Morrison agreed with obvious anxiety about implications for his social and financial position. Though prudence demands immediate departure to minimize potential damage to my interests. He paused with visible calculation. Miss Gardner, I trust you will await resolution of these temporary complications before considering alternative arrangements? The presumption underlying his request sparked Catherine's temper despite her relief at his departure. Mr. Morrison, I naturally wish you success in resolving your business difficulties, though I cannot make commitments regarding my future during such uncertain circumstances. Morrison's expression showed displeasure at her failure to provide reassurance about exclusive attachment during his absence. Miss Gardner, surely our mutual understanding merits some commitment to patience during temporary setbacks? James intervened with diplomatic firmness. Morrison, naturally Catherine will give appropriate consideration to your situation while you address these urgent matters. Though prolonged uncertainty serves no one's interests well. After Morrison's hasty departure the following morning, Catherine found herself walking in the garden with emotions combining relief, guilt, and growing determination to address her feelings for Simon honestly rather than accepting social conventions that ignored her heart's clear preference. Simon appeared on the garden path with obvious hesitation about approaching her during such emotionally charged circumstances. Miss Gardner, I heard about Mr. Morrison's sudden departure. I hope his business difficulties prove manageable. Catherine felt her pulse quicken at his presence combined with the first privacy they had enjoyed since Morrison's arrival disrupted their interrupted conversation. Simon, Mr. Morrison's departure provides opportunity to continue our discussion without external pressures. He stepped closer with obvious internal struggle between desire and propriety. Catherine, nothing has changed regarding the practical obstacles that prevent us from pursuing personal attachment. Your family's expectations, social pressures, and my own uncertain circumstances continue to render romantic involvement inadvisable. What if circumstances could change? Catherine asked with growing boldness. What if social expectations could be challenged rather than merely accepted? Simon's expression showed both hope and skepticism about possibilities for overcoming established barriers. Catherine, such changes would require sacrifices that might prove more difficult than anticipated. Marriage to someone in my position would mean abandoning social advantages you have always known. Perhaps I value different advantages more highly than social position, Catherine replied with passionate conviction. Intelligence, integrity, genuine affection, and shared values seem more important foundations for happiness than inherited wealth and established connections. Before Simon could respond to her declaration, Eleanor's voice called from the house with obvious urgency. Catherine, could you come inside immediately? Your father has received important correspondence that affects all of us. Catherine felt anxiety return at her mother's tone, though she and Simon walked together toward the house with shared determination to address whatever new complications had arisen. They found James in his office with expression combining surprise, concern, and grudging admiration as he reviewed documents that had arrived with the morning mail. Catherine, Simon, James began with unusual formality. I have received detailed correspondence from Morrison's business associates in Denver that sheds considerable light on his character and methods. He held up several pages of closely written text. It appears that Morrison's shipping enterprises involve practices that make Hadley's calculating approach seem honorable by comparison. Catherine felt vindicated in her instinctive dislike of Morrison's character. Father, what sort of practices? Systematic fraud involving shipping weights, forged railroad documents, and misrepresentation of cargo contents to insurance companies, James replied with obvious disgust. Morrison's partners have implicated him directly in schemes that have cost other businesses thousands of dollars in losses. Simon stepped forward with professional interest. Mr. Gardner, might I examine those documents? My experience with railroad shipping might help assess the scope of such practices. James handed over the correspondence with obvious respect for Simon's expertise. Your evaluation would prove valuable, certainly. Though the evidence appears quite conclusive regarding Morrison's criminal involvement. As Simon reviewed the documents with growing amazement, Catherine felt overwhelming gratitude that circumstances had prevented her from accepting Morrison's proposals. "Father, how did you learn about such matters?" "Morrison's former business associates contacted me directly when they learned of his visit here," James explained with satisfaction. "They felt obligated to warn respectable families about his true character before he could manipulate additional victims." Eleanor entered the office with expression combining relief and maternal vindication. "James, I confess myself grateful that Catherine's instincts about Morrison proved accurate. His calculating approach to courtship suggested character flaws that external advantages could not compensate." Simon looked up from the documents with professional admiration. "Mr. Gardner, these schemes demonstrate sophisticated understanding of shipping procedures combined with complete absence of business ethics. Morrison's methods would have ultimately involved Thornfield in criminal liability through association." Catherine felt profound relief at this validation of her resistance to Morrison's suit, though she recognized that his departure still left unresolved questions about her future and her feelings for Simon. "Father, does Morrison's disgrace affect your views regarding appropriate marriage arrangements?" James studied his daughter thoughtfully before responding with unusual openness to alternative possibilities. "Catherine, Morrison's deception has reminded me that external advantages mean nothing without fundamental integrity." He turned toward Simon with obvious respect. "Carmichael, your intervention regarding Hadley's schemes and your current consultation have demonstrated character that proves far more valuable than inherited social position." Catherine felt her heart leap with hope at her father's apparent reconsideration of previous objections to Simon's circumstances. "Father, are you suggesting that character might outweigh social position in marriage considerations?" "I am suggesting that recent experiences have taught me to value proven integrity over social appearances," James replied with growing conviction. "Carmichael, your work here has exceeded my highest expectations. Your expertise, your ethical approach to business, and your obvious regard for Catherine's happiness have impressed me considerably." Simon stepped forward with careful dignity. "Mr. Gardner, I am honored by your confidence, though I remain concerned about the social complications that marriage between Miss Gardner and myself might create for your family." Eleanor moved to stand beside her husband with surprising support for unconventional possibilities. "Simon, social complications seem manageable compared to the difficulties that unethical business associates like Morrison and Hadley would eventually create." She smiled with maternal warmth. "Catherine's happiness matters more to us than maintaining appearances that could ultimately prove hollow." Catherine felt tears of joy threaten as her parents demonstrated understanding that transcended conventional social expectations. Father, do you truly believe that personal happiness and genuine compatibility might justify challenging social conventions?" James nodded with the conviction of someone whose business experience had taught practical wisdom about evaluating character accurately. "Catherine, building a successful partnership requires mutual respect, shared values, and compatible goals far more than similar social backgrounds." He extended his hand toward Simon with obvious sincerity. "Carmichael, if you can provide security and happiness for my daughter, I would be honored to welcome you as my son-in-law." Simon clasped James's hand with emotion that finally broke through his careful professional composure. "Mr. Gardner, Mrs. Gardner, such acceptance means more than I can express." He turned toward Catherine with love that no longer required concealment. "Catherine, your family's blessing removes the final obstacle to declaring feelings I have struggled to suppress for months." Catherine moved into Simon's arms with joy that felt like coming home after long exile from happiness. "Simon, I have loved you since our first honest conversation about building something meaningful rather than merely pursuing profit." As Simon held her with reverent tenderness, Catherine felt profound gratitude for circumstances that had revealed true character behind social appearances. Morrison's disgrace and her parents' wisdom had created possibilities she had hardly dared imagine when the day began with Morrison's threatening ultimatum. "Catherine," Simon murmured against her hair, "I promise to build a life with you that honors both your worth and your family's confidence in our partnership." Eleanor wiped away tears of maternal satisfaction. "Catherine, I believe you have chosen far more wisely than conventional arrangements would have permitted." James smiled with the contentment of someone whose practical wisdom had been validated by emotional truth. Carmichael, welcome to the family. I anticipate our business partnership will prove as satisfying as your marriage to Catherine. As autumn afternoon sunlight filled the office where their future had been decided through honest recognition of character over convention, Catherine felt overwhelming happiness at finding love that honored both her heart's desires and her family's deepest values. Simon's arms around her represented security based upon mutual respect and shared dreams rather than calculated social advantages. Their wedding the following spring would scandalize some Denver society matrons while earning admiration from neighbors who had observed Simon's character and capabilities firsthand. Catherine would discover that marriage to someone whose integrity matched her own created satisfaction that exceeded her highest expectations, while Simon would find in partnership with Catherine and her family the meaningful work and genuine acceptance he had sought throughout his professional struggles. Years later, as they watched their children playing in the garden where Simon had first declared his love, Catherine would reflect that challenging social conventions for authentic happiness had proven the wisest decision of her life. Their partnership had built not merely personal contentment, but a business empire founded upon ethical practices that benefited their entire community while demonstrating that true worth stemmed from character rather than circumstances of birth. Standing in Simon's arms as their engagement was celebrated by family whose wisdom had ultimately transcended convention, Catherine knew she had found her true home in a love that honored both practical necessities and romantic dreams through genuine partnership between equals.